To a top story now, and the United Nations Security Council says it is alarmed by ties between Nigeria's Boko Haram Islamist militants and the Islamic State group. In a statement, the Council condemned all terrorist attacks, abuse of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law by Boko Haram in the Lake Chad Basin region. It also stressed the need for member states in that area to complement the regional military and security operations against the group. The Security Council demanded that Boko Haram immediately end unequivocally cease all violence and all abuses of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law. Meanwhile, the U.S. is concerned about indications that Nigeria's Boko Haram jihadists are sending fighters to join ISIL in Libya in increased cooperation between the two groups. During a visit to Nigeria, Deputy Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said that ISIL has a large presence in Sirte, exploiting a security vacuum as competing governments and armed groups fight for power. Boko Haram, which has been waging a 7-year insurgency in northern Nigeria, last year pledged loyalty to ISIL, which has seized parts of Libya, Syria and Iraq, but little has emerged about the extent of cooperation.
What we've seen are reports of more cooperation between them. What we've seen is Boko Haram itself being more sophisticated in its messaging or propaganda, if you prefer, and that bears the hallmarks of Daesh, which is very unfortunately very sophisticated at doing that. And also reports of Boko Haram fighters in Libya with Daesh fighters. So these are all elements that suggest that there are more contacts and more cooperation. And this is again something that we're looking at very, very carefully because we want to cut it off and we want to prevent it from going any further.
Now, the sentiments from the UN Security Council and the US government comes as Nigeria hosts an international summit to deliberate on the war against Boko Haram. Several leaders, including French President Francois Hollande, are attending that summit. Let's get more details and insights from CCTV's Sophia Dengo in Abuja and Kate Parkinson live in Paris. Sophia, let's begin with those concerns over the apparent links between Boko Haram and ISIL. Would you say they're visible on the ground? What are the authorities there saying?
Well, you know, Penina, as early as 2013, around March, we started hearing that ISIL had indeed accepted the pledge from Boko Haram in terms of their alliance and consolidating the group here in West Africa as a chapter of ISIL. And of course, those growing concerns have been confirmed by this visit by the U.S. envoy. You know, Boko Haram has, gone through a considerable amount of pushback here in the last 1.5 years. So the military has done a considerable job in taking back territory, almost 14 local governments here, especially in the northeastern part of the country where they have been in strong operation. However, this link or this, uniting with ISIL really proves that Boko Haram is extending themselves not only here in Nigeria, but to join a global terrorist or jihadist movement in many respects, and that cannot be overlooked. And so the regional summit that is taking place here in Nigeria today and into the weekend is really to see how the world, including the continent, can strategize in minimizing the reach of Boko Haram, especially now that they have been so open about their allegiance to ISIL. Penina.
All right, Kate, President Hollande is among leaders attending that summit in Abuja. What's the French interest here?
Well, France has said that Nigeria's struggle is the struggle of France as well. And France, of course, very much understands the need to stem the spread of global terror following the terror attacks that we had here in Paris last year. France is also heavily invested in Nigeria economically and has actually found itself, or rather its interests, targeted by Boko Haram in recent years, as well as French citizens being kidnapped. So certainly protecting French investment in Nigeria is very important to the French President Francois Hollande, as well as keeping the economic ties with Nigeria warm. And it is highly likely that on the sidelines of this security summit, the French President will also be pushing France's economic agenda.
All right, so Sophia, President Buhari has been on an international campaign seeking support for the war against the group. And of course, you've mentioned here that this summit is all about strategizing on ways to minimize the reach of Boko Haram in the region. But what more does Buhari hope to achieve with this summit?
Well, Penina, let's look at what he has achieved, and perhaps maybe that can be the evidence of the significance of ushering, a government that is following through on a promise, perhaps, on fighting terrorism until it is no more, especially in the case of Boko Haram. President Muhammad Buhari, since coming into administration, has been canvassing pretty much of the world internationally, but really placing a focus on this joint military coalition here in the Lake Chad Basin region, where Boko Haram is actually operating, and in extending Nigeria's bilateral relations and opening Nigeria up to discussions and to really understanding what it will take for Nigeria to ally with the rest of these, nations in finding a solution to, minimizing the terrorist reach of Boko Haram. So not only has President Muhammad Buhari made a considerable effort here in the region, but also extended himself to the United States, to the U.S., and you are seeing constantly, a reminder through these nations with feedback, not only in embedding with the military, coalition here in providing training, and in recent months also providing an open window to perhaps dialoguing over providing manpower. So, Penina, we can say that perhaps what President Muhammadu Buhari has done so far is considerable compared to what has been done in the past.
All right, Kate, French security agencies are already stretched, battling the terror threat at home. What practical contribution can the French offer to the efforts against Boko Haram?
Well, the French military is extremely overstretched. As you mentioned, the terror threat is still very present here in France. There is still a state of emergency in place. There are some 10,000 combat troops deployed across the country. It's France's biggest military operation, and it's here on home soil. In addition to that, there are thousands of French troops deployed in missions and on operations around the world. The majority of those are in Africa. It will be very difficult for the French president to commit to putting more boots on the ground, but France has committed to help Nigeria militarily. The two countries have signed an agreement for greater military cooperation. It's likely we're going to see increased training, increased maritime security. France has been playing a role for some time now behind the scenes, very much sharing intelligence. We know that French fighter jets that have flown over the combat area, that are stationed in Chad, have been sharing satellite imagery with the Nigerian authorities. It's also highly likely that the French president will be using his influence on Nigeria's French-speaking neighbours as they try to come up with a regional military solution to the Islamic militant threat in the area.
All right, Kit Parkinson joining us live from Paris, and Sophia Dengo in Abuja. Many thanks to the both of you.